one reason to focus on national debt is to note how serious that symptom is. But the disease itself is the monetary system because of how money is created, for whose benefit it's created. It's created for the benefit of those that create the money, which are the owners of the banks.
Right.
The money that is created in this society is not created for the benefit of the people or the country.
Welcome to Rethinking the Dollar. Today I'm excited to have my guest, Mr. Alan Myers, a CPA, blogger, and monetary historian who's joining us today to discuss our national debt and how it has destroyed our monetary system. Over the last 5 years, Alan has dedicated his forensic accounting experience in studying and researching the Federal Reserve System and certain aspects of commercial banking. Alan is an active voice in the monetary education realm, and he blogs at domesticenemy1.typepad.com. So, Alan, welcome to Rethinking the Dollar.
Michael, good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Sounds good. Looking forward to definitely talking with you further. We've had a great couple of conversations the last couple of days, so I've got a chance to really get your take on the whole national debt fiasco that we're currently in. So looking forward to having you share your take with us here on Rethinking the Dollar. Now, before we get any further, I wanted to get into some Rethinking the Dollar questions. And the first one that comes to mind is, what comes to Alan Myers' mind when he hears the words Rethinking the Dollar?
What comes to my mind right now when I hear the term rethinking the dollar is, in part, let's start thinking about the dollar. Most people, if you ask them one basic simple question, and I've done this many, many times, what do you know about the Federal Reserve System? They look at me, they kind of chuckle or they sneer a little bit. They may say New York, they may say interest rate, and that's it.
Right.
Which tells me that as a society, we don't even really think about the monetary system. We don't think about what money is. I like your title, Rethinking It, because it really leads to the conclusion that we haven't done enough thinking. So let's really start doing some rethinking about the basics of what the monetary system is, the history of money, what is money, why do we need it? But ultimately, who creates it? How is it created? For whose benefit?
All right. Good
So
explanation.
definitely very important to be thinking and rethinking the dollar.
All right. Good explanation there. Now, how important is it for, Americans and citizens globally to really begin taking a interest in understanding monetary literacy and as well as their own personal financial dealings?
I like that term. I like that term, monetary literacy. I really do.
Thank you, sir.
How important is it to know about the most important system in your political economic society? That's really the question I think you're asking. And I think it's absolutely key. It's absolutely fundamental, because nothing happens in our society without basically being connected to, running through our monetary system. It's fundamental.
Right. I would agree. Now, if Alan Myers was given a chance to give what I call the global state of the economy address, now we're going to get into national debt, but what would you tell people right now if everyone was glued in and tuned into this channel right now, listening to you speak at the podium? What would you tell them?
I'd be very short and simple. Death by debt. Our national debt, whether it's you just talk about the national government debt or the larger national debt, which I'll explain later, the debt is our national debt, whether it's the national government debt or the greater national debt. It's unpayable. It's soon to be unserviceable. It's something that cannot continue forever. Basically, what our national debt is 57, our national debt fiscal year after fiscal year has not decreased. This is political, economic death by debt. That's what I tell them.
Right. Fair enough. Now, speaking of national debt and debt, let's get into that topic a little bit, because you've done a lot of research and you've uncovered a lot of things that we're going to get into today. Now, if someone walked up to you on the street and started a conversation with you, and somehow the idea of debt came up, how would you begin to describe and just explain to them what the national debt is?
I would differentiate because the term national debt is used a lot, and I've begun to separate it between national government debt, that's the debt the national federal government owes, and then what I call the national debt. The national debt is not only what the government owes, it's what all the states owe, counties, cities, municipalities, and of course, personal debt. Our country is awash in debt. We're drowning in debt. If you took all the money that exists in this country and threw it at all the debt, at the end of the day, we would have no more money in our system and plenty of debt.
Mm-hmm.
But to stay at the national government debt, it just when was it? In late January, it finally cleared $19 trillion. The number trillion, or the word trillion, has just become a word to people. But it's not. It's a massive number.
Mm-hmm.
Most people probably have never even written the number trillion, which is one, the number one, followed by 12 zeros.
Right.
To give you an idea of just how big, massive 1 trillion is, 1 trillion seconds is more than 31,709 years. And to put that in perspective, Michael, if I were to give you a job and I asked you to hand out 1 trillion $1 bills, and you were going to take a second to hand out each one without breaks, vacations, naps, nothing, it would take you 31,700 plus 9 years to hand out that $1 trillion. This is just beyond our general comprehension. To take it into distance, 1 trillion inches is more than 633 times around the Earth at the equator. 1 trillion miles is more than 107 round trips from Earth to Pluto and back. That's just 1 trillion.
Right.
And our national debt, not including the unfunded liabilities, is telling us is that whatever we're doing isn't working, because since 19 trillion.
Wow.
This is beyond our ability to pay, and eventually beyond our ability to service.
Right, right. So 19 trillion, all those, that's just a astronomical number that, most people never really think about because they're so used to the concept of debt being natural and normal. Like, as you mentioned, debt has not always been something that, our country has had to rely upon in order to keep itself afloat. And now it's just common knowledge that, politicians can get up at the pulpit, or not the pulpit, but the podium, and just, yeah, we're going to fund this, we're going to fund that, we're going to do this, we're going to put money here, we're going to invest money here, but yet it all comes from debt. And people don't really think about the fact that that money has to be repaid or should be repaid. But do you think the national debt will ever be touched or repaid, or is there any interest in repaying the national debt, or debts rather?
Under the current system, and you can go on to budget.gov to check out proposed budgets. Under the current system, you cannot tax the people enough to maintain the programs that are already in existence. So borrowing is a continual necessity. In fact, in one of the proposed, and when I say budget.gov, this appears to be a federal website, and you go to one of the tables in the back of the big PDF. Back in 2011 or 12, in this proposed budget, the amount of they call it revenue, I don't consider it revenue, just taxation.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of taxes collected did not cover all the mandatory outlays and interest on the debt, which meant before, in this budget, before 1 penny was spent on government, the budget was already running a deficit. And as I said, the history of the national debt since 1957, it has not decreased year after year, which means the way the system is designed right now, and because of how money is created in the system, our national government must continue to borrow And the fallacy is that the government can continue to borrow.
Right, right. Now, how did you yourself first get into, you know, you have a CPA background, so you deal with numbers all the time. So what literally led to you awakening to where you like, let me ask some questions and start doing some research on debt and things like that. So how did you get into this realm?
About 5 years ago, as I tell people, I was totally asleep. I wasn't active, I wasn't involved. And in my education, both in college and post college, continuing education to maintain my CPA license, there's no education about the monetary system. None. A friend of mine kept telling me, Alan, you got to read this book. You got to read this book. I finally got the book. The book is The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. It's about 600 pages. Most people, if they picked it up, would use it as a doorstop. I cannot tell you where in the pages of that book that I woke up, but that is the book that got me to wake up. It is a fantastic source of history, knowledge, people, events, and it just literally woke me up when I finished it, I knew I needed to continue my study. Right. And that led me to other books, documentaries, and as I continued on, I was continually surprised by what I was learning, because
Right.
what I was learning, what I was being exposed to, was not in any conversation I was having with anybody.
Right.
Yet I was beginning to see just how important this knowledge is. It's fundamental to how our society is working.
Right. Now,
that's what got me started.
Right. Now, the other day we were talking, and you mentioned, just to kind of paint a picture as to where our current economy is at, and where our monetary system is taking us. You reference, a ship and wanting to prevent the ship. So give us that analogy again. 'Cause I thought that was very impactful, and it got some triggers going in my mind on how to really paint a picture that can be vivid enough where people can begin to understand how important this subject is.
The ship we're talking about is the Titanic. Back in the day, the real Titanic, the RMS Titanic, set sail. It was deemed to be, or believed to be, unsinkable. The owners of the ship apparently believed that story, so they didn't have sufficient lifeboat capacity to actually be able to put everyone, all passengers and crew, in a lifeboat should there be a problem. In fact, they only had about 2/3 the space for all the passengers and crew. When the Titanic unfortunately hit that iceberg, started to go down, the crew was so poorly trained and prepared to help the people into lifeboats that only approximately 1/3 of the passengers got into lifeboats and made it to safety, which meant at least another third could have made it to safety, but they didn't fill the lifeboats to capacity. And the lifeboats had capacity of between 45 and 60 passengers. I liken our country, and I love America, but I liken our country to being the USA Titanic, and we're steaming towards the ice fields. What happened with the RMS Titanic is it didn't change course in time. If we change course in time, we can prevent another major disaster, because when a country's economic or monetary system collapses, you have incredible hardship. And one of the classic examples, excuse me, is the Great Depression. According to Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winning economist, the Great Depression was caused by the Federal Reserve System. The Fed was able to reduce the amount of money circulating by 1/3 between 1929 and 1933. The Great Depression wasn't an accident, it wasn't a whoopsie. It was a deliberate act. And I think we are all pretty familiar with the hardship that the people of this country and the country experienced post the beginning of the Great Depression.
Right.
But the Titanic is a reminder that you may think you're absolutely solid, you may think that you're very prepared, but when you leave your safety to the hands of others, and they are not prepared, you are not prepared.
Right. Right there, the idea that, the Titanic did go down and it had the reputation as being unsinkable, but yet it came to an end. And so our country has the reputation of being the great nation. We are, the supreme, whatever, whatever. We've given ourselves these titles as if there's no way that United States of America can be brought down in a sense. And monetarily, it seems like the national debt could be one of those catalysts that kind of put us in our place. It seems like, huh?
What I would say is the national debt is more a symptom of the greater disease. And that if you focus, one reason to focus on national debt is to note how serious that symptom is. But the disease itself is the monetary system, because of how money is created, for whose benefit it's created. It's created for the benefit of those that create the money, which are the owners of the banks.
Right.
The money that is created in this society is not created for the benefit of the people or the country. Right. So the greater disease is the monetary system.
Right, good analogy there. Now let's talk about the creators of money, the Federal Reserve System. Give us a little bit of background on exactly what the Federal Reserve System is, how it operates. Especially you have an accounting background, maybe you can give us a little insight into how things happen, behind the scenes, other than just what we know about the Federal Reserve from the front of the building.
When I say the Fed, I'm talking about the Federal Reserve System. Mm-hmm. Federal Reserve System is a law. It's not a constitutional amendment. Mm-hmm. The law was passed in December of 1913. The Fed went operational in 1914. The Fed was sold to the country as not being a central bank like they have in Europe, because there were 12 separate independent banks throughout the country. At that time, because most of the wealth and power were east of the Mississippi, there was only one Fed bank west of the Mississippi, and that's in San Francisco. Each bank is privately owned by its shareholders. It's not public. There's nothing public about the Fed system, and I could go into great detail about it. However, the Fed controls the monetary system. The Fed gave the power to create money to commercial banks. The commercial banks create money by basically making journal entries into their general ledger and creating loans. Every time people talk about the printing of money, as in the money coming off the printing press from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, I can tell you, technically, by definition, that is not money. When the Fed gets all that paper with green ink from the Bureau, now the Bureau is an agency of the U.S. Treasury. When they get all that paper and they put it in their vault, it's not money. It's not inventory. All it is a printing expense to the Fed. And the Fed pays a per note charge for the paper that's printed. And depending not on the denomination, but on the run, it will vary between round numbers 6 and 9 cents a note. Mm-hmm. And one is 1,000 notes, which means if you ordered up 1,000 ones, which would be $1,000, it would cost $80. The charge would be $80. If the order was 1,100 dollar bills, the charge would be $80. It's not money. And when banks get it from the Fed, they request the paper. It's not money. It's that portion of their reserves in physical form. Paper money, cash, whatever you want to call it. That does not become, by definition, money until it comes into our hands. Until what it's called is that the money is in circulation.
Wow. That is a good way of describing the difference between money and currency, fiat currency, right? The government issued paper. Let's talk about the idea now that we've accepted the idea of the Federal Reserve note, when it enters our hands as being money based upon faith and confidence behind it being able to purchase things. But yet every day we use it to do transactions as well as to save and to invest for our retirement and future things like that. How does all this national debt or debt in general and the debt that we exchange amongst each other play into the future? Like, how is it? I mean, is it sustainable for us to continue to exchange these Federal Reserve notes and it not really come back to hurt us, whether it be with purchasing power or what are your thoughts with that?
A lot of questions there. I'll try to address them all, but I'll start with the first, your last question. Very important. One of the mandates of the Fed, one of its jobs, was to maintain a stable currency. Now, to me, stable means unchanging, not continually changing at a relatively stable rate.
Yeah.
And one of my economist friends agreed and actually made the comment that I was being too generous in what I'm about to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
The Fed went operational in 1914. And in 1914, a $1 Federal Reserve note, which I'll just call $1,
Mm-hmm.
was worth 1914 pennies. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Today, in 2016, a $1 Federal Reserve note is worth maybe 2 to 4 1914 pennies. This is called loss of purchasing power. This is the result of what's called inflation. Another term for inflation is called hidden tax, which means as time progresses, it takes more dollars to buy the same thing because the purchasing power has diminished over time. Houses nowadays cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Back in the day, they cost $2,000 to $5,000 to $10,000. These houses aren't so much, and I'm just using this as an example. It's not that housing is just so much more valuable or expensive. It just takes more dollars to get what people used to get 100 years ago.
Right.
This is directly tied to our monetary system.
Right. And the idea of wages. Like I did some research on my own and saw that I think it was 1913. Manufactured worker was around a quarter or somewhere around, not, a couple cents per hour. Now, we have the fight for 15, so everyone's trying to fight for 15 as if that's the magical number that really makes a difference in their livelihood. Where it behind the scene, it's the monetary system. That's the problem. So instead of shooting for a number, why not look to redo and readdress some things with our monetary system? So I think that's kind of interesting how you mentioned the whole price rising thing. So Alan, let me ask you a question in regards to wages. You just referenced how housing prices always go up and things like that because of our monetary system. Now let's talk about the wages. How today there's a movement of fight for 15, whereas in 100 years ago or so, the minimum wage or the wage was a quarter or however it was. Give us a little information on the wages aspect and how our monetary system plays into the whole wage idea.
I'd be happy to. I'm going to have to read this. I wrote this a while ago, and so I'll be looking down to read this.
No problem.
On January 4th, 1914, Henry Ford did an outrageous thing when he raised his auto workers' minimum wage to $5 for an 8-hour day, or 62 cents per hour. Prior to this, the minimum wage for an auto worker was $2.34 for a 9-hour shift, or 26 cents per hour. At the rate of 26 cents per hour, a 1914 auto worker making the minimum wage could pay off his portion of the national debt with 113 hours of work.
113 hours.
At the inflated 62 cents per hour that Henry Ford was paying, a 1914 auto worker making the minimum wage could pay off his portion of the national debt by working just under 48 hours. However, in 2010, making the California minimum wage of $8 per hour, which is greater than at that time the federal's $7.25, a worker would have to work 5,491 hours, wow, 2.6 years to pay off his or her portion of the national debt. Now, what I'm telling you is that even at the lowly minimum wage of $2.34 an hour, a worker back then would take less than 3 weeks to pay off their portion of the national debt. Now, back in 2010, it would take 2.6 years at the minimum wage.
Yeah, wow. That's, those numbers, once again, those, using numbers to kind of describe how massive that is and things like that really helps, because it was a couple days 100 years ago. Now it's, 2.5 years type of thing in 2010. So it's gotten worse since then. So 2016, it's good to say it's probably a decade now to pay off, your portion, if that, at the wage. So yeah, so this goes to show how massive it is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And focusing in on minimum wage is a symptom of our monetary system problem.
Mm-hmm.
It won't solve it. Why push for these bigger and bigger minimum wages when what we need are jobs that produce better and better wages? And if we have a system that continually demands that people have to be taxed more and more to try to maintain an unsustainable system, which our monetary system is, this is not going to turn out well.
Right.
We need to focus on the disease and not the symptoms.
Right. Well, as we draw down towards the end of our conversation, wanted to get your take on a couple of last issues. One being the Federal Reserve note as our primary medium of exchange, the only legal tender we currently exchange. What are your opinions on the next 2, 5, 10 years of its usage and storage of value thus far with our current system that we're currently in?
Currently, based on the rate of inflation, which is constant, and the almost complete total loss of purchasing power of the dollar, it's not really much of a store of value. Right. However, it is, as you pointed out, legal tender in our system. What I focus in on is not so much how long will we use the Federal Reserve note. It's about educating people primarily about national debt and what the monetary system is. So we get to the point where we realize we must change our monetary system. Right. to help save this country, because this country is a great country. It's absolutely worth saving, but we can't do it with a monetary system that continues the demand for more and more borrowing. In fact, whether it's the national government or people, borrowing must continue to keep this system going.
Right. All right. Well, understandable there. Now, last question. Let's get into, at least one or two solutions of awakening people. You have a couple good ideas on how to begin taking initial steps. Give the audience a way to really begin to educate themselves, as well as to begin to wake up and maybe perhaps share this subject matter with their friends or family.
I use the phrase educate, motivate, activate. And the reason I use that phrase is that's basically the process I went through. For several years, I went through what I would call the educate, motivate. Every time I would read something or watch something or learn something, I got more motivated to continue. Eventually, that educate, motivate cycle or cycles got me to activate. To begin, people must start studying. And don't go into the system thinking that, or don't go into the educational process thinking that it's too heavy, it's too much, I can't understand it. It's not. At the very basic level, it's all very understandable. I would encourage people to begin their education. I would encourage people to read The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, The Web of Debt by Ellen Brown. If you want a real eye-opener, watch the documentary Inside Job, which won an Academy Award for Best Documentary back in 2009 or 10. And it's all about what led up to the 2008 crash. And even just recently, the Big Short, a fantastic film and a great book. Ultimately, we must replace the monetary system. To do that, I work backwards. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and all of its amendments must be repealed. To do that, we have to get Congress to act. To get Congress to act, we, the people, must take charge of what's going on. Most people that I've talked to, they don't really know who represents them in the House or the Senate. They've never sent them an email. They've never made a phone call to their office. They don't track what they're doing, how they're voting or not voting. We're the citizen owners of this country. The people in DC are our elected employees, and we've completely ignored our duty, our job, to tell our employees what to do. So I'm not really surprised that things aren't working out. But if we want to fix this country, then we, the people, must demand the changes, and we can. You send an email, you make a phone call to your elected employee in the House and the Senate. If there's a local office, you go visit them, and you tell them straight up, repeal the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and all of its amendments, or don't come home. And in the process of going through that, it would be in a step-by-step. It wouldn't be an abrupt just pull the plug, because we need a monetary system.
Right.
In the process, it would be not only getting that done and setting a sunset date for the end of the Federal Reserve System. In the process, people would vet ideas, come up with a new solution, figure out how to employ it, and make a smooth transition from one monetary system to another. Because, as we've talked about before, if you just pull the plug on this, it'd be a disaster. You can't do that.
Right.
You have to bring it to a steady state closure and already have something in place running and operating to make the smooth transition.
All right, fair enough. Well, Alan Myers, any last thoughts on our monetary system, and what's next for Alan Myers?
What's next for me is I'm going to go back to my blog a little bit more. I've been working on other side projects. You can follow me on Twitter at FTR1776. FTR are the initials that come from the phrase "for the Republic." It also are the initials of my pen name, Franklin Thomas Revere. If anybody wants to know more, they can reach out to you and you can reach back to me.
Right.
I'm in the process of developing what I call a national debt workshop. It takes about an hour, hour and a half. And though this is a symptom and not the disease, it is a great essential place to begin, because most people will engage in the conversation about the national debt because they won't push back. They won't say it's a conspiracy theory. And I use that term, to me, is just a conversational tourniquet. Conversation is over. There's a lot to know about the national debt and related topics. And when you see that, you'll begin to understand and want to learn more about the Federal Reserve System. What I'd like to close with, because we've talked about a lot of stuff, very heavy, and some people might think that, I'm just a little too far out there, and, why should we really think this, or why should we even begin to entertain it?
Right.
And what I'm going to read to you is a short quote from David Rockefeller. He's the head of the Rockefeller family. This is from his autobiography, Memoirs, published in 2002. Now, I saw this quote many times on the web, but I knew I had to verify this. So I actually bought his book, and this is the quote. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the entire quote except for the last line. I'm going to recap just what I believe he's just said, and then I'm going to give you the last line. And this will give you an idea of what the head of one of the biggest, if not the biggest and most powerful financial family in the United States said in 2002. For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidences, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will.
Yeah.
What I think he's saying here is that he and his family have been verbally attacked by what he calls ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum. That's a pretty wide group.
Yeah.
He says that he and his family, they claim he and his family have an inordinate influence over the political economic institutions of America. They're working with a secret cabal against the best interests of the United States, and they're working to build a more one world, if you will. That's a pretty heavy charge.
Yeah, it is.
His one short sentence answer is, if that is the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it.
Wow.
I'll leave the watchers to decide whether what he's really telling you.
Yeah.
And what really is the state of not only our national but international monetary systems, and what I call the central banking elite of the world, what their game really is.
All right.
Because I think he speaks it very clearly in that one short quote.
Yeah. Well, Alan Myers, I appreciate you sitting down with us. I definitely will stay in tune with you. We'll, got a couple more conversations in us that I would like to, discuss some other things as well. But other than that, we'll continue to follow your work and, keep doing what you're doing. You do a great job of delivering a message very vividly for the audience to understand. So hopefully some people, woke up today.
Michael, thank you so much for having me on your program. I really appreciate the opportunity. I definitely want to stay in touch with you, and I am going to keep working to help spread the news and the information that this is a very, very serious problem, but we, the people, can fix it. Thank you again so much.
I agree. Good talking to you. Good talking to you.
Be safe and well. Bye-bye.
Well, this concludes my conversation with Alan Myers from domesticenemy1.typepad.com. Hope you found our conversation to be informative as well as educational. I want to encourage you to scroll below, leave us a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts on this interview, as well as subscribe to Rethinking the Dollar for more RTD interviews and more monetary news. Look forward to bringing more interviews. Until next time.